You may remember last year that there was a break-in to a compound in El Dorado, Texas, where 400 plus young people were taken away in that compound, and there were charges of abuse and neglect and underage marriage and a variety of things that they were brought out in. Well, Brian comes from that organization. He is the 28th child of a 31-child family where there was 4 moms and 1 dad, but he has come to a saving relationship with Jesus in 1996. Since then, he's become a licensed Baptist minister, and currently he attends Christ Community Church in Omaha, Nebraska. Yeah, that's a good church. I'm all for that one. He's the author of this fantastic book that recently came out called Illegitimate, How a Loving God Rescued a Son of Polygamy, a fantastic book about his story and Mormonism. So would you please welcome to the platform this morning our guest speaker, Brian Mackert. Thanks, man. All right, I'm going to do a little bit of an interview with you here this morning before we head out. I know it's no surprise to you.
No.
You come from a family, 31 kids, 4 moms, 1 dad. What is it like growing up in a family with that many people under one roof?
Well, imagine the normal sibling rivalry that you have in a monogamous family. Now multiply that by 31. What you get is chaos.
Yeah, I guess.
So there was a lot of competition growing up between the children in wanting attention from my father, but we loved each other and we still had a lot of fun together.
So inside the house, was there like one mom that took care of stuff, or how did that get divided out?
Yeah, ladies, if you think you've had a stressful day, check this out. We had one mom who stayed at home, took care of all the kids with the help of the older children. She took care of all 31 of us. And the other 3 wives, they went out and worked to help support our large family. So can you imagine the stress she had in her day?
Did she have, like, you know, upper rank kids that took care of lower rank kids?
Yes, there was definitely a hierarchy. Part of it depended on whose mother was your mother, and then part of it was on how old you were and where you fell in the hierarchy. The older you were, the more senior you were, the more power or authority you had. And some of my siblings like to wield that power.
Yeah, that's right. Like get your salute as you go by. Yeah. All right. Well, I know that Joseph Smith had like 30 wives, more than 30 wives, right?
33.
33 wives,
yes.
Joseph Smith had. And oftentimes polygamy and Mormonism are associated with one another, but there is a real difference between the fundamentalist LDS church and the standard LDS church. Help us to understand the difference between the mainstream and FLDS in the polygamy perspective.
Okay, well, Joseph Smith began the practice of polygamy as part of his expanding theology on godhood, and it was practiced by the Mormon church up until 1890 when they abandoned the practice. And later, because of government pressure in the 1930s, they began excommunicating Mormons who were still practicing polygamy. Well, there were people who felt like this tenet of the faith wasn't a disposable tenet of the faith, and they felt that the Mormon church was in error, and they broke away from the mainstream Mormon church, and those people ended up forming what we know today as the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Wow. And there's a theological reason behind that as well, right? That polygamy was such a predominant thing and why they thought it was important. It wasn't just, you know, the fun factor. It was, you know, there was some theology behind it. I didn't mean to say that.
He's right. He didn't mean to say that. It started with the 132nd section of the Doctrine and Covenants, which my 4th great-grandfather helped to vote and establish as a revelation from God. And in that revelation, it said that polygamy was the only path to godhood. And so that's why polygamy was such a prominent feature of the early Mormon faith.
Yeah.
Up until the 1890s when they got rid of it.
Yeah.
So
interesting. Now, your book is very interesting as well. I mean, there's stuff that just reaches out and grabs you in the middle of it, not the least of which are the first words in the book. And I know that you went through time and began to separate from the church, but you still had some issues that led you to a counselor's chair where you said these opening words of the book: "I wanted to kill my father, not metaphorically, literally." I mean, those are like jaw-dropping words. Where did that come from? How did you get to that point?
Well, when I was 13 years old, my mom got divorced from my father, and she sat me down to explain why and she revealed to me that my father had been sexually abusing my sisters. Now, this was devastating for me as a young man because my father had raised me with a code of honor where women were to be revered and respected and protected because they bring life into this world. And here, the man who had taught me this code of honor was the man that my sisters needed protection from the most. And the statute of limitations under the law had expired, and so there was no justice for them under the law. And as they started going through therapy, they would share the horrors of what they had experienced at my father's hands, and I wanted my father to pay for his crimes. And so I began plotting his murder partly because of that, but another reason why I began plotting his murder was because of a doctrine taught by Brigham Young that the fundamentalists still hold to, and it's called blood atonement, where they believe that the blood of Christ can't cover certain sins, and the only atonement for those sins is the shedding of your own blood. So in plotting my father's murder, I was saving him from the torments of hell. It was out of wanting justice for my sisters and out of love for my father. And I loved my father, and I hated the fact that I loved him. But fortunately, God had a different plan for my life.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like some of your family background left you in a pretty twisted place at that point. But I know from your book you escaped from the FLDS movement in 1991, went to Marine Corps boot camp, and at that point you went from FLDS to the mainstream LDS, right? And then 5 years later, in 1996, you had an amazing experience where you came to faith in Christ, and since then you've been moving forward. What have you learned about the difference between the Mormon view of Jesus and the biblical view of Jesus?
Well, there are many contrasts. I found the promotion for this series ironic. My mom taught me as a young man that Satan never comes at you with an outright lie. He always hides it in truth. And his goal is to gently lead you astray with one little lie. And so that was rather ironic to me.
Yeah, the worst lies are 99% true.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, Smith starts with something that's very near to Mormonism. And then he later introduces false doctrines that begin to lead his people further and further from the truth until they're worshiping a completely different God, a completely different Jesus, a completely different gospel. And how many things can I change about God, Jesus, and the gospel before they're all completely different?
So what are some examples of the Jesus changes?
Well, in Mormonism, Jesus isn't God incarnate or God in the flesh. He isn't the creator of heaven and earth. God isn't the one and only true God, but one of many gods. Jesus is part of God's creation rather than the creator. And Jesus isn't the only Son of God. He's one of many sons. He's one of God's spirit children. But the biggest thing is the atonement of Christ. In Mormonism, the atonement of Christ only atones for Adam's fall in the Garden of Eden. It didn't atone for mine and your individual sins. We have to earn our own salvation.
Interesting. Now, I've had conversations with some Mormons about those very kinds of things. I know you've had way more conversations than I have. And sometimes I'll hear a comment from either them or people who have been to a Mormon church, and they'll say, that's not what's taught in my church, or that's not what I believe. Tell me a little bit about your sources. I mean, where are you getting your information, and you know, what's the credibility behind it?
Well, one of the problems about understanding Mormonism is that many of the doctrines that are unique to Mormonism can't be found in one place. I can't find any of them in the Bible. I can't find any of them in the Book of Mormon either. I have to go to the Doctrine and Covenants and the Pearl of Great Price, and then I have to go to other writings such as the Journals of Discourses, the Doctrines of Salvation, and the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith. So ferreting out what Mormonism actually believes and teaches is kind of like detective work. You have to piece it all together and summarize it. And so there's a short story I'd like to share with you.
Yeah, go ahead and tell the story.
There's this young man that I was sharing my faith with, and he had been a Mormon for 10 years. And we got to the point where we were talking about how Mormons believe that they can become gods one day. And he said, oh, we don't believe that. I've talked to my missionaries, my bishop, and my stake president, and they all deny that Mormonism teaches this. Well, I assured him that Mormonism does, and he said, well, you're going to have to show me where you got that idea from. So I went to the 132nd section of the Doctrine and Covenants and showed him in Joseph Smith's own words what Joseph Smith taught. And he was shocked that he had been a Mormon for 10 years and didn't know this key doctrine about Mormonism, and that his leaders, his religious leaders, had lied to him about it. And so he went and confronted them. And when he confronted them, each one of them said that the reason why they had lied to him about what Mormonism really teaches is because he wasn't ready for that level of light yet. Well, needless to say, he renounced his Mormon faith and he became a Christian. But folks, I'm not here to tell you what you believe about Mormonism. That would be impossible, and it'd be presumptuous on my part. I'm here to discuss what Mormonism teaches, and there's a good chance that there's a big difference between the two.
All right. Well, I think it's about high time we let you teach us about what Mormonism teaches.